Hey everyone, and welcome to another Kano Reviews, where we review games both new and old on all platforms. If you like the content that I make, then please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a review when it comes out. Today we talk about Silent Hill: Shattered Memories, one of the games in the Silent Hill franchise that was made by a Western studio. In general, the Western Silent Hill games are widely revered as the worst in the series. But one particular game has its share of fans, and even those that will recommend it to the fans of the first three games by Team Silent. And that game is Shattered Memories, which is a retelling and reshuffling of the original Silent Hill story. It uses elements from that first game, like main character Harry Mason trying to find his missing daughter Cheryl, reintroducing familiar characters like Police Officer Sybil, but then also completely changing characters around like Nurse Lisa and Dahlia. Shattered Memories arrived on the Wii and was later also ported to the PlayStation 2. Since I knew that the game had its share of cult followers, my expectations were a bit higher than usual, and though I definitely found things to love about this game and that feel very unique, I also stumbled on quite a few things that I thought did not work well or faltered the overall experience. Let's take a deeper dive into this Silent Hill entry. So in Shattered Memories, you play as Harry Mason, who is involved in a car accident, and after he wakes up, he finds that his daughter Cheryl is missing. Armed with just a flashlight, he goes to explore the nearby town and search for his daughter. He soon realizes that things are pretty messed up around here. Strangers suddenly live in the house that Harry owns. Photos and stories about his daughter appear, but they are talking about a much older woman instead of a small child, and even some people seem to doubt that Harry is actually who he claims to be. The storytelling of Shattered Memories is fairly simple, and though I of course wished it would have been deeper and more meaningful like the story in Silent Hill 2, it has to be said that Silent Hill 3 also did not have that deep of a story, so it's serviceable with Shattered Memories. I will actually say that the twist at the very end, where you realize who the person is who's doing all these tests and quizzes at the shrink, was pretty cool and felt unique enough to where the creators got away with the same story trope of it maybe being all in the player's own head. The game controls in third person, and unlike the fixed camera angles like in the first three games, we now get an over-the-shoulder view similar to something like Gears of War. With the Wii remote, you control your flashlight to illuminate the environment. And let's then take this time to quickly talk about the graphics. The graphics are actually quite good for this game. Wii games always have this weird graphical fidelity to me, since they are prettier than PlayStation 2 and GameCube games, but not as pretty as an Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 game. It's somewhere in between, but what this does result in are much better textures compared to earlier Silent Hill games. You can properly read most of the signs and posters on the walls in real time, and this even gets implemented in some of the puzzles or numbers you can call with your phone. The lighting and shadows are also really impressive, with the tiniest objects casting shadows that change dynamically on where you stand and shine the light. Now, it's not super realistic in terms where it distorts accordingly to the surface it is casted on. You can clearly see this when shining the light against a person on the street and see that it does not properly cast a shadow on the street, but rather behind the person, but still, the effect is pretty nice. The world feels quite detailed and lived in, with so many objects and assets being used, but also unique to the location you are in at that certain moment. It's quite ironic to use the term lived in for an abandoned town, but that is truly the case as you explore burger joints, high schools, shopping malls, and even a cat house at one point, each with their own unique art design, props, and assets. Really cool, and one can see that a lot of effort went into making each place feel different and believable. The art style is a bit more cartoony compared to earlier Silent Hill titles, and though it's not entirely cartoony, but the proportions of certain parts of the characters like their eyes and look are just a tad bit more cartoony instead of that grisly realistic look of something like Silent Hill 2. It honestly kind of fits the Wii look, since it's of course a family-friendly console mostly, and since this game rehashes and mixes up the original story so much, the different art style is not annoying or misplaced at all. Now, the most unique thing about this game, and the reason why fans who love it would recommend it to play, is because the game changes accordingly to choices that you make in interviews with the shrink and while you play in third person as Harry Mason. I know we have heard this slogan a lot in all sorts of games, and in reality choices often don't matter that much, but here it works in a bit of a different way, and it's indeed very unique and fun to experience. The game opens with a screen where it states that this game psychoanalyzes you and changes things accordingly to your answers. The game plays you just as much as you play it. Those are some big words, and I would agree that this is indeed very exaggerated, but there are definitely some surprises waiting in store for those who are not prepared for it first. The game opens up where you're having a talk with a psychologist in first person. He asks you to fill in a question form, and some of these questions are pretty personal. Some are a bit more standard, like, do you make friends easily, true or false? Do you prefer abstract ideas, true or false? But also questions like, does alcohol help you during stress, true or false? Or, have you ever cheated on your partner, true or false? The game actually really had me laughing out loud with some of these questions and how personal some of them could be. I answered them honestly, so had to indeed admit that I have enjoyed roleplay in the bedroom, or that I might not have been as faithful back in those turmoil university years. Yeesh. Talk about awkward. But the game asks these questions and changes certain things you will come across, mostly in terms of looks. It will not take long before you run into police officer Sybil, and her look will drastically change depending on the answers you gave or some of the choices you made while playing. Sybil can look like a normal police officer, with straight brown hair and a long thick coat to keep her warm in the winter weather. Or, she can look a bit like a blonde bimbo with lots of makeup on her face and a short blue shirt with the buttons open slightly at the top to reveal a lot of her cleavage. Dang, the game even knows I'm a titty man. This scares me. Now, jokes aside, having this system where dependent on your answer it will change the appearance of certain characters is very cool and very unique. It's only sometimes a bit difficult to understand what exactly the trigger was that the game is responsible for the change in look. See, I started the game over and answered the questions the exact same way, but Sybil then looked different and way more professional and normal. While playing the game, you can also hold the B button and focus on a certain area as the camera zooms in. If you zoom in on some erotic imagery like a bikini calendar hanging on the wall or a poster advertising for a cat house, it will influence and lead more often to the characters being more sexualized. But maybe there's still a certain bit of randomness attached to it or something, since I said I answered the questions the exact same, but maybe the look of Sybil was changed due to some actions or things I looked at while playing. I know, for example, that erotic imagery or answers are not the only thing that has influence, and looking at alcohol bottles or beer advertisements, etc. will also influence the look of things in a different way. And yes, Sybil can look a third way that gets influenced by this, where she's wearing a police hat that looks way more intimidating, mostly because the alcoholic influence gets tagged to a weak but also wicked persona of the game's character in Shattered Memories. But not only do characters and the world change depending on your answers, the psychologist's questions, or the things that you look at, but you sometimes also blatantly get a choice to go to different areas that will have effect on things. Early on, you can see this where you can head into one of two different stores. The first is a video store, selling TVs, VHSs, etc. And the other is a female clothing store with summer dresses, underwear, etc. It's clear that if you go to the female clothing store, that the game will lead to being more sexualized than if you go to the video store. They even have a puzzle in the clothing store where you need to get a key, and the only way to get it is by literally unzipping the clothes of a mannequin, which isn't very subtle in what it wants to portray. And in that sense, the game is not subtle at all with some of the choices or when it gives you a potential moment where something might happen. You might be at a nurse's home and watch TV while she is changing. If you look over towards her room, you can see her change in her underwear in the mirror, thereby obviously making the game think you are more of a pervert, thereby leaning more towards the story of you having a divorce because you cheated on your wife. Again, having these choices and having it affect the world's story and characters is very cool, but it does lack any subtleness that, for example, Silent Hill 2 has. Like I said, with the two stores, it's very clear on what the result will be according to the game, so it does not necessarily feel like a natural choice. Before even entering the stores, I already know, this is the one that will be more sexualized than the other. Same thing happens again later, where you need to go into one of two rooms, and the door to the left room has stamps of stars and planets on them, while the other has stamps of kissing lips on them. Again, very clear on what the choice is here, and I sometimes do wish that they were a bit more subtle or not hinting as much on what the outcome would be, since you can feel more like the game plays you like it's intended. Because it never felt like the game played me that much, because many of the times it was pretty clear on what my limited choices were and what the outcome would be. Then the last way you can influence how the game perceives you is by focusing on certain areas while you are talking to someone in first person. Now, the obvious sexualization would be, of course, to focus on their cleavage while they are talking, but the more interesting things are, for example, looking at liquor cabinets or shelves with alcohol while talking to the shrink or someone at a bar. Lastly, what's also a fairly short but nevertheless very cute section is where you get to color a picture of your house. You have a lot of colors to choose from, and you can color the house, the roof, the windows, the car, and even the two people in the picture with what color or color variation you want, and even the clothing that they're wearing. And then, depending on your coloring, in the next cutscene, the house will actually be that color, to the point where its roof and door will have a different color if you drew it that way. The car will be the color you gave it, and even the people living there will be wearing the same color clothing you gave it as well. It's honestly quite impressive and very cool, especially seeing how small some of the details could be with even changing the clothing colors of the inhabitants. It actually made me wish to see what you could do with this technology today, more than 10 years later. It honestly doesn't affect a lot at all. It's just that this cutscene will be a little bit differently colored, that is all. But it still feels like a direct result and therefore is very cool and felt refreshing. So this system is definitely cool and will also have effect on other characters you'll meet throughout. But what about the actual gameplay? Well, Shattered Memories deviates a bit from the typical going into indoor environments and checking out all the doors to find out which ones are locked and which ones aren't. Despite many of Shattered Memories' environments being quite open with even some optional explorable areas to go through, it still feels quite linear. It's always clear on where you need to go next, and there's always a certain flow the game holds up, which makes you feel like it pushes you in a certain direction. This time around, however, there are no well-written notes to collect, but instead there are some mementos which you can get, which are nice, but nothing more than that. The puzzles you get are also interesting since they make good use, or logical use, of the motion controls. It does feel quite gimmicky though, much like that psychology system in that you always need to do some sweeping or swiping in order to get a key. One of the first you need to do with this is, for example, get a key by grabbing a can, which for me it was a soda can, but if you were persuading more to the alcohol, it can actually be beer cans. But basically you grab the can and you turn them with the remote so that the key falls out of the can. It's a nice nod to Silent Hill 3, where Heather gets a key from the soda can too, but later you have to open handbags, wallets, cabinets, windows, etc. And even dissect a frog at a certain point to find something inside. Often these moments are just one or two swipes, and like I said, it feels very gimmicky, but works and is fine as it is. What I think is a bit of a shame is that the puzzles are way too simple sometimes, with literally an arrow pointing at the item that you need to interact with. It feels like not one, but two steps down from the puzzle design from the first 3 Silent Hill games, and even Silent Hill 4, which I dislike a lot, had a way better puzzles than most of these. There's a few puzzles where Shattered Memories tries to be a bit smarter, but not all of them work. The one that seemingly is pretty clever, but just does not work at all in execution, is the puzzle in the art room, where you have to shine a light on objects which have their shadow cast numbers on the wall behind it. We later have seen puzzles like this in, for example, Resident Evil 7, etc. Other puzzles that are a bit dumb are the ones where you need to get gumballs from a gumball machine, and you need to get them in a certain color order. And if you don't have the right color, you need to grab the gumball machine and wiggle it. It kind of feels unnatural, and it makes it to where the simple gimmicky puzzles where you just need to open or close something work better in terms of execution. But then let's talk about the big elephant in the room. The reason why, in my opinion, I was quite disappointed by this game. And those are the chasing sequences. Throughout the game, you will have several chasing sequences where you are being chased by monsters and need to escape. The prompt for these chases will always be given by the world turning into an ice world and several areas like doors or ledges being highlighted with a bright blue color. These bright blue colored areas are always places you can interact with by going through a door, going up a ledge, or crawling under something to get through. As you go from door to door, you will get chased by these monsters, and honestly, their design is quite weak. They're just these fleshy, faceless monsters, and though there's some variety in how they look, with some being more feminine, like having feet in the same shape of high heels, or more abstract enemies with all sorts of shapes and edges around their body, it is in general that one same type of enemy you face through the entire game. Since there's no combat and you can only run away, you basically do the same section over and over and over again every time it happens. It got to the point where whenever the world turned to ice, I rolled my eyes and let out a sigh that I was going to do this again, and indeed, it was always quite boring. Though the first time, it is pretty interesting, but it already loses you the second time, and the monsters simply are not that scary, and the chasing sequences are not thrilling. Now the goal is always to get to a certain spot, and though the chase sequences is not that long the first time around, in later sections there are significantly more doors and areas you can go to, and it's pretty easy to get turned around or even get lost. I will say that I am happy that it's not randomly generated, because it does mean that you can solve the sequence again pretty easily once you have done it once. And though the fact that you could easily get turned around by going through a wrong door, which might be scary or stressful otherwise, since these sections are so dull, it just becomes more frustrating than anything else. If the enemies grab you, you need to shake the Wii Remote wildly to throw them off, and that's the only thing you will do. You will also find flares, which will keep the monsters off you for a good 20 seconds or so, giving you a little bit of breathing space. Not all chase sequences begin with you being chased, but some have the enemies patrol through the various areas, and if you are lucky, you might be able to continue for a while before a chase is started. The game lets you know if enemies are nearby as the static becomes louder and louder coming from the Wii Remote, much like the radio does in Silent Hill 2 and 3. It's honestly these chase sequences that ruin the game for me and make something that could have been simple but interesting a whole lot more tedious. They happen every 20 minutes or so, and it's literally the same boring gameplay over and over again. I cannot see how people who defend this game find these parts fun. Maybe some of them might dislike these parts as well, but like the other parts that the game offers so much more that it doesn't matter in their eyes. But I found these sections too tedious, dull, and boring that it took the wind out of the sails for an otherwise pretty entertaining little horror game. The chasing sequences become more trial and error sections, and it's really one of the reasons why I prefer the old school survival horror system way more, where you have only a little bit of ammo and have to think, do I use my ammo now with the chance of being without later on? That extra dilemma and stress adds more pressure and does offer you different situations than just running and hiding over and over and over again. It's honestly also one of the reasons why I dislike Alien Isolation a bit more than most, but even that still gives you way more options to win some time from the alien, so you won't be doing the same thing entirely. I really don't understand why they did not add new twists, or at least new enemies to these chasing sequences, because they feel the exact same at the end of the game as they did at the beginning. Shattered Memories is also never scary, neither with its enemy design or supposed scares. The most it does is have a weird shadow walk while a scream can be heard, and I got goosebumps only once during a sequence where I entered a movie theater and some disturbing scenes were being shown on the screen accompanied by horrible static. And that's pretty much it. The game introduces some neat little mechanics with the psychoanalyzing of your actions and changing things like character appearances and the look of the world, but it never becomes more than, okay, that's cute reaction, and does feel a bit gimmicky from time to time. Same exact thing with the puzzles, which make good use of the motion controls, but feel a bit too simple and not comparable to earlier puzzle types. And then finally, the chase sequences are outright horrible and the real reason why this game disappointed me. The game in and of itself is very short. It's way shorter than Silent Hill 2 and 3, with it only taking around 3 hours or so to complete. Since I disliked Silent Hill 4 so much, I thought that this game would be more to my liking. But in all honesty, I don't necessarily like it all that much more than Silent Hill 4. Maybe just a little bit, since you don't have to babysit for 4 hours, and at least the world feels more believable with better characters and voice acting. But it is indeed not a game that can stand anywhere near what Silent Hill 2 and 3 were, and in the end, Silent Hill Shattered Memories gets a 6.5. It's slightly better than 4, but not by much. And that will be it for the coming future in terms of my Silent Hill reviews. I do not own Silent Hill Downpour nor Homecoming, so I'm not able to review those. But judging from what I've heard about those games, that might be a blessing in disguise. I have dipped my toe finally in the games beyond Silent Hill 2 and 3, and I'm indeed not liking the direction that this beautiful series went to. I hope to one day see that this series be revived and brought back to its former glory.